The sound of an electric guitar really brought it all together for me. I'll keep playing as long as I feel that way. Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page, the guitar gods of the 1960s, were friends because they were both very good at music and respected each other. But their friendship broke up because they were competing with each other and having different ideas about how to make music. After that, they go their separate ways, but not before leaving behind a legacy of timeless music and a question that still shines through the pages of rock history. What caused this fight between these two big names in London's music scene? After a lot of talk about reports, Eric Clapton finally says why he and Jimmy Page broke up, focusing on what Jimmy did that made him so mad. These special bonds between Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page were formed by their love of music, their amazing skills, and their desire to always improve their craft. But as the saying goes, these weren't meant to last. The work that Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page did together. In London's lively music scene, Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton started their musical careers. They were admired for their amazing guitar skills there. Slowhand is another name for Clapton. He became famous with the Yardbirds, a band that was known for combining rock and blues very well. When Clapton quit the Yardbirds in 1965, he suggested Jimmy Page as a replacement. Page, however, chose to focus on session work at the time and suggested Jeff Beck instead. This choice was the start of a long-lasting friendship between Page and Clapton, who stayed close even though their careers went in different directions. Their friendship grew stronger when they played together in jam sessions and remade old blues songs. Page wasn't just a casual player, she also produced recording sessions for Clapton's band, which showed how much they both loved the blues and new ways of playing the guitar. This collaboration showed how the London music scene is very connected, with personal and business ties often crossing over. Page and Clapton stayed in touch during their lives, even as they worked on their great projects. Page later joined Led Zeppelin, a groundbreaking rock band, and Clapton became a major guitar star with Cream, Blind Faith, and his own work. No matter how successful they were, their shared love of the guitar and blues music kept their friendship strong. They worked together and pushed the limits of their music because they both loved blues music, especially the music of stars like Robert Johnson and Muddy Waters. Page and Clapton continued to help each other in their personal and professional lives as their careers went on. They would often run into each other at shows and festivals to share the stage and talk about their ideas. Their friendship went beyond music because they were both early adopters of the guitar as a profession. In 1983, they had a big event in their relationship, when they played at Ronnie Lane's Arms charity concerts to raise money and awareness for studies into multiple sclerosis. Page and Clapton showed off their skills and friendship on stage with Jeff Beck again, all while helping a good cause. The Arms concerts show off not only how good they are at music, but also how close they are as a group and how determined they are to use their position to do good. In the years that followed, both Page and Clapton continued to grow as singers. Clapton focused on a successful solo career and won many awards, including being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame more than once. Page, on the other hand, stayed close to Led Zeppelin, which is one of the most popular bands of all time. Even though their paths took them in different directions, Page and Clapton stayed friends, both artists recognizing how important their early work together was to the development of their careers. The fact that they are still friends after all these years shows how music can bring people together through the ups and downs of fame and success. Page and Clapton's friendship, which began because they both loved the guitar and the blues, still moves fans and other artists. Even so, their partnership did not last. But before we talk about that, let's look at their early lives and the jobs they had before they met. Early life of Eric Clapton. Patrick Clapton was born on March 30th, 1945 in Ripley, Surrey, England. His parents were Edward Walter Fryer and Patricia Molly Clapton. Clapton thought that his grandma Rose and her second husband Jack Clapton, who was Patricia's stepfather, were his parents when he was young. This made him think that his mother was his older sister. There was a false belief that Clapton's real last name was Clapp because Reginald Cecil Clapton, Clapton's grandmother's first husband, was also named Clapp. Later, Eric's mother married another Canadian soldier and moved to Germany. Eric stayed in Surrey with his grandparents in their care, made in Germany on his 13th birthday. However, it was hard to play because it wasn't very good and had steel strings, which made me lose interest for a while. After a break, he picked up playing the guitar again 2 years later and made it a regular part of his life. Being exposed to blues music at a young age had a big effect on his musical growth. He spent a lot of time learning chords and skills by playing along with records. Clapton used a portable Grundig reel-to-reel tape player to record and listen to his practice sessions over and over again until he was happy with his progress. After leaving Holyfield School in Surbiton in 1961, he went to Kingston College of Art, but he was kicked out at the end of the school year because he continued to focus on music instead of art. His level of skill at playing the guitar had hit an advanced level. Consequently, he became famous by the time he was 16. During this time, he started performing as a busker in places like Kingston, Richmond, and the West End. In 1962, he began playing blues music in bars across Surrey as part of a duo with fellow blues fan Dave Brock. At the age of 17, he joined his first band, the Roosters, which was an early British rhythm and blues group. Tom McGuinness played guitar with them. From January to August 1963, he stayed with the group. He played with Casey Jones and the Engineers in a run of 7 shows in October of that same year. Before working with Jimmy Page, he was the tenor in a different band. Eric Clapton joined the Yardbirds, a rhythm and blues band, in October 1963. A big part of his style comes from Chicago blues and famous musicians like Buddy Guy, Freddie King, and B.B. King. This made him stand out right away. The Yardbirds started out playing covers of blues songs and quickly gained a lot of loyal fans, especially after getting a regular gig with the Rolling Stones at London's Crawdaddy Club. They became even more well-known when they went on tour with the famous American blues singer Sonny Boy Williamson II. Because they worked together, they recorded an album together in 1963, which came out in 1965. The boss of the Yardbirds, Giorgio Gomelski, gave Clapton the name Slow Hand, because the crowd would applaud slowly whenever Clapton had to change a broken guitar string during a show. In December 1964, Clapton played at the Royal Albert Hall for the first time. Eventually, he thought of the venue as a familiar and safe place because he had performed there so many times. With the song For Your Love written by Graham Goldman, the Yardbirds had their first big hit in March 1965. Clapton, on the other hand, was sad that the band was moving toward a more popular pop sound because he loved the blues. This anger made its way onto the radio. Clapton suggested Jimmy Page as a possible replacement after he left, but Page, who was loyal to Clapton, suggested Jeff Beck instead. Clapton played with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers for a short time in April 1965, after leaving the Yardbirds. They broke up a few months later. During the summer, he worked with Jimmy Page on tracks that came out under the immediate All-Stars name. After that, Clapton went to Greece with a band called the Glands and played with a Greek band the day after a terrible car crash. Clapton came back with the Blues Breakers in October 1965 and quickly became known as the best blues guitarist in clubs. His work on the groundbreaking record Blues Breakers, John Mayall with Eric Clapton, which came out after he left the group in July 1966, made him even more famous. Clapton used a Gibson Les Paul guitar and a Marshall amplifier, which is what led to the famous Clapton is God Street Art in London. Despite the fact that he didn't like the term and saw it more as an ideal than a fact. By July 1966, Eric Clapton had left the Blues Breakers and was ready to start a new musical journey. He joined the groundbreaking supergroup Cream. This new group, which included Clapton, Ginger Baker on drums, and Jack Bruce on bass, paved the way for Clapton's growth as a singer, songwriter, and guitarist. Cream's electrifying performances, which were marked by intense blues jams and epic guitar solos, made the band famous very quickly and cemented Clapton's position as a legendary musician. Even though Clapton wasn't very well known in the US before he joined Cream, his time with the band made him famous, starting with their first show at the prestigious National Jazz and Blues Festival. At this time, Clapton's amazing guitar skills were becoming more and more well known, but he had to deal with competition from artists like Jimi Hendrix, whose innovative ways had a big effect on Clapton's future work. Clapton's first tour of the US was with Cream in 1967. That's when he played his famous The Fool guitar for the first time. Psychedelics were a very exciting time. Clapton's fiery guitar riffs were a big part of Cream's rise to fame, especially on their second album, Disraeli Gears, which was recorded in New York. Cream was one of the first rock bands to show off their musical skill and use freestyle to make the music sound more real. Hit songs like Sunshine of Your Love and White Room showed how successful they were in the music business. In the end, though, Cream broke up in 1968 because of growing disagreements, especially between Bruce and Baker, Clapton's growing dissatisfaction, and the effect of the band's music from Big Pink. Clapton and George Harrison worked together on their last record, Goodbye, which had the hit song Badge Cream got back together for 2 huge shows in 1993 and 2005, which blew people away. There are CDs, LPs, and DVDs with the great music from these live shows that fans can enjoy. In 1969, Eric Clapton got together with Ginger Baker, Steve Winwood, and Rick Gregg to form the famous supergroup Blind Faith. Their first show was in London's Hyde Park in front of 100,000 people. It was the start of their journey. Blind Faith, their self-titled record, had hit songs like Can't Find My Way Home and Presence of the Lord, which is Eric Clapton's most famous song. Even though they were successful at first, the band broke up after only 7 months together. Clapton went on tour with Delaney and Bonnie and friends and played with members of John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band after being in Blind Faith. With help from Delaney Bramlett, Clapton made his first solo album, Eric Clapton, which included the famous song After Midnight. He also worked on George Harrison's album All Things Must Pass, and with famous singers like Stephen Stills and Howlin' Wolf. This new band put a lot of stress on making music together, which was influenced by the old band's focus on well-crafted songs and harmonies. However, this wasn't easy and came with its own set of personal difficulties. The 1970s were a great time for Clapton professionally, but they were also a hard time for him personally, with problems in his relationships and problems with drug and alcohol abuse. Clapton withdrew from recording and performing music to find comfort at his home in Surrey after the breakup of the Dominoes, even though he was still in love with Boyd and having problems with his friendship with Harrison. He struggled with a heroin addiction during this time, which caused a long break in his career that was only briefly broken by his appearance at Harrison's concert for Bangladesh benefit performances in New York in August 1971. Clapton finished his act even though he passed out on stage and needed to be revived. Pete Townshend of The Who put together the Rainbow Concert, Clapton's comeback show at London's Rainbow Theatre in January 1973. The goal was to help Clapton get over his drug use. Clapton showed his appreciation for Townshend's kindness by playing the preacher in the 1975 movie version of The Who's Tommy. Of note, he wore a fake beard in some parts of the movie because he had a disagreement with the director about using older footage. In 1974, Clapton moved in with Boyd. They didn't get married until 1979, but by that time, Clapton had beaten his heroin addiction. Even though he started drinking more, he put together a laid-back touring band with artists like Riddell Terry, Sims, who died in 2011, Old Acre, Element, and Levi. In 1974, they worked together to make 461 Ocean Boulevard, an album with shorter songs and fewer guitar solos. The cover of I Shot the Sheriff became Clapton's first #1 hit. It was the same kind of music on the next record. There's one in every crowd. With the release of EC Was Here in 1975, Clapton's live shows became more consistent during this time. Clapton had some problems, though. For example, he had to change the name of his record from The World's Greatest Guitar Player to There's One in Every Crowd to avoid confusion about its ironic meaning. Clapton kept working in the music business. He worked with bands and singers like Bob Dylan on albums like No Reason to Cry and Slow Hand, which had hits like Wonderful Tonight. And J.J. Cale's Drugs. Clapton was a special guest at the band's last show in 1976, which was filmed by Martin Scorsese and called The Last Waltz. Let's look at Jimmy's early years now that we know about Eric Clapton. Was it like the one Eric had? Look around. Jimmy Page's childhood and his love of music. Page was born on January 9th, 1944. In the West London neighborhood of Heston. His parents were James Patrick Page and Patricia Elizabeth Gaffigan. His father was a personnel manager at a plant that made plastic coats, and his Irish mother was a secretary for a doctor. In 1952, the family moved to Feltham before settling down at Miles Road, Epsom, in Surrey. Page went to Epsom County Pound Lane Primary School from the time he was 8 years old until he was 11. After that, he went to Ewell County Secondary School in West Ewell. He found his first guitar, a Spanish guitar, while living on Miles Road and remembered how strange it seemed to be in the house. Page started playing the guitar when he was 12 years old. He took a few lessons in Kingston, but mostly he taught himself. The other musician that was talked about was a young man named Rod Wyatt, who Page was a few years older than. They would practice at Page's house with another friend, Pete Calvert. Page practiced for 6 to 7 hours every day, and he always brought his guitar to high school, even though it was sometimes taken away and given back to him after class. Early on in his career, Page was inspired by rockabilly guitarists like Scotty Moore and James Burton. Moore and Burton both played on Elvis Presley albums. He got the idea to start playing guitar from Baby Let's Play House. He tried to sound like Moore on the live version of Whole Lotta Love from the song Remains the Same. Page played a Hofner President acoustic guitar on BBC One in 1957. He bought it with money he saved from working during the summer. This guitar had a pickup that made the sound louder. A used 1959 Futurama Grazioso was his first solid body electric guitar. He later got a Fender Telecaster instead. Page had seen Buddy Holly play the Telecaster on TV, and he got the chance to play a real one at an electronics show in London's Earl's Court Exhibition Centre. Page's favorite types of music were acoustic folk music and skiffle, which was a popular type of English music at the time, and the blues styles of well-known acts like Hubert Sumblin, Buddy Guy, Freddie King, Elmore James, and B.B. King. This mix of rock and blues music was the start of his musical tastes. Page competed in Weldon's All Your Own Talent on BBC One when he was 13 years old. He was in a skiffle trio and played songs like Mama Don't Want to Skiffle Anymore, and In Them Ol' Cotton Fields Back Home with an American influence during the show. He talked about his desire to do biological study in the hopes of finding a cure for cancer if one hadn't already been found. In an interview with Guitar Player magazine, Page said that street performances were a big part of the beginning of his work, and that he saw them as a good way to learn. He joined a band called Malcolm Austin and the Whirlwinds when he was 14 years old. He played with Tony Busin on bass, Stuart Cockett on rhythm guitar, and a drummer named Tom. They did covers of Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis songs. This group didn't last long though, so Page formed the Paramounts with Rod Wyatt, David Williams, and Pete Calvert the next year. The Paramounts were able to put on a show in Epsom. At one show, they opened for the band that would become Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. While he was being considered for a job as a lab assistant, he chose to stop going to West Ewell Secondary School and focus on his music business. At the age of 15, which was the youngest age allowed at the time, this choice was made. It took him 4 GCEO levels to finish before he left. He decided to study music after having a big argument with Miss Nicholson, the school's deputy head, about his musical goals, which she strongly attacked. There were times when Page had trouble getting other musicians to work with regularly. He remembered that it wasn't easy to work with other musicians, saying, "I used to play with different groups, anyone who could put together a gig." From 1960 to 1961, Page played with beat poet Royston Ellis and singer Reddy Lewis at the Mermaid Theatre. Singer Reddy Lewis noticed Page and asked him to join his backing band, the Redcaps, when guitarist Bobby Oates quit. That same night, singer Neil Christian asked Page to join his band, the Crusaders. Christian first saw a young Page act in a nearby venue, which led to them working together for about 2 years, during which Page helped with several of Christian's recordings, including the hit song The Road to Love in 1962. Page got glandular fever while working with Christian and became very sick. He couldn't keep traveling. After he got better, he chose to stop making music and focus on painting, which is something he loves. This made him decide to go to Sutton Art College in Surrey. In a comment from 1975, he talked about Jimmy Page's early work before he worked with Eric Clapton. Jim Page made a lot of noise in the British music scene when he first started out as a solo guitarist. Page showed off his skills at well-known places like the Marquis Club while he was still in school. He has played with greats like Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Cyril Davies, All Stars, and Alexis Corner's Blues Incorporated. People in the business noticed how talented he was and gave him chances to make singles for Columbia Graphone Company and Decca Records. One of his early sessions that stood out was his work on Jed Harris and Tony Meehan's hit song Diamonds, which went to the top of the records chart in 1963. After playing with a few different bands for a short time, Page decided to become a full-time session player. To set Page apart from Big Jim Sullivan, another famous session guitarist, he was called Lil Jim P. He became known for being flexible and reliable, and he often filled in as a backup guitarist for different acts. He often worked with drummers, but sometimes the lead acts were given more attention than him. Page was given artistic freedom during his sessions, even though he couldn't read sheet music at the time. This made his already growing fame even greater. Page did studio sessions with well-known singers and bands. He became well-known as a studio guitarist for producer Shel Talmy, which led to work with The Who and the Kinks on songs. He really stood out when he played the 12-string guitar on the Kinks' first record and helped with The Who's early hit, I Can't Explain. From 1964 to 1965, Page worked with a lot of different singers in the studio, including Joan Baez, Jonathan King, the Nashville Teens, the Rolling Stones, Van Morrison, Dave Barry, Brenda Lee, Shirley Bassey, and Petula Clark. Page played guitar on the music in the background of the Beatles movie A Hard Day's Night in 1964. He began working with Immediate Records in 1965 as his fame as a singer grew, where he worked as a director on the movies Ito and Our Man. He got to work with great musicians like John Mayall, Nico, Chris Farlow, and Eric Clapton because of this job. During that time, he even worked with Jackie DeShannon to write and record songs for different projects. Page worked in the music business and contributed his skills to well-known records like Sunshine Superman by Donovan Leitch, Release Maine by Engelbert Humperdinck, and Joe Cocker's first album With a Little Help from My Friends. He also worked closely with Roy Harper on a number of songs while they were together. Page had worked on so many sessions that it was hard for him to remember what he had done, even though he had a lot of experience in the studio. In a radio interview, he talked about how busy he was and how he sometimes had 3 sessions in one day, each with a different type of music. You can only find many of Page's early tracks on unofficial ones, but they show how versatile and important he was in the music world. He showed off his ability to combine different styles and add his own unique touch to many projects by working with singers like Keith Richards and on songs like Scarlet. Around the middle of the 1960s, Page chose to stay away from session work because the music scene was changing and adding more brass and orchestral elements. In 1964, Page politely turned down the chance to fill in for Eric Clapton in the Yardbirds because he wanted to stay loyal to his friend. This showed how dedicated he was to his co-workers and the music business. This is when their friendship grew stronger. Now that we know about their personal lives, let's look into the reason why Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page can't stand each other, their fight. Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page's friendship was tested when something bad happened with one of the songs they worked on together. The original goal of these sessions was to record their creative takes on blues music, but they turned into a fight when Andrew Lug Oldham, the flashy Rolling Stones manager and owner of Immediate Records, got involved. Oldham used Clapton and Page's contracts with Immediate Records to get Page to hand over the tapes. He then changed them by adding overdubs with 3 members of the Rolling Stones, including Mick Jagger on harmonica, before putting them out. Clapton was very angry about this because he thought the commercialization of what he thought were private jam sessions was dishonest. So, a rift formed between the two musicians, which made them less trusting of each other than they had been before. Even after the recording incident, Clapton and Page continued to work together and perform together at many events, including the 1983 Ronnie Lane benefit concert, which was put together to help their friend and former Faces bassist Ronnie Lane, who had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. But the tension from the Immediate Records episode lingered and made it hard for them to connect with each other, leading fans and historians to wonder if their relationship was real. In interviews, Page has said over and over that he did not make any money off of the disputed recordings and that he had to follow through on his contractual responsibilities. He said he was sorry for what happened and made it clear that he was just as much of a victim of Oldham's tricks as Clapton. In any case, what happened changed their relationship in a big way. Changed it from a relationship based on mutual respect to one based on fear. Clapton has sometimes acknowledged that they worked together before, but he has been more quiet about the event, which suggests that the wounds haven't fully healed even though they happened a long time ago. He has often talked about how upset he is that their music is now being sold to people, because he thinks that the purity of their experimental sessions was lost in the process. Clapton saw those recordings as a moment of artistic freedom, different from the structured productions he was used to. Hearing them changed for business reasons made him feel like that creative essence had been betrayed. This story about Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page shows how complicated friendships can be in the high-stakes world of rock and roll. Their relationship, marked by deep admiration for each other and occasional disagreements, is a reflection of the swinging 1960s music scene as a whole, which was a time of new ideas, competition, and teamwork. During this time, artists were very creative, but they also had to deal with the stresses of fame and the sway of strong managers and record labels that often put money over artistic integrity. Clapton and Page's careers continued to do well over time, but the recording event stayed with them as a memory. Both guitarists became famous and renowned. Clapton became famous as a solo artist, and Page solidified his place in rock history with Led Zeppelin. Despite this, the Immediate Records event would sometimes come up again when they talked about their relationship. This served as a warning that the business side of the music industry can test even the strongest friendships. Even though there were problems, there were times when people got along again. Clapton and Page sometimes shared the stage in the later stages of their careers, showing that they still deeply respected each other's skills, even though they had had problems in the past. Even though they only played together sometimes, their shows together were a real reminder of how well they got along musically in the first place. Fans find the friendship between Clapton and Page to be an interesting look into the personal lives of two of rock's most famous guitarists. It shows how hard it is for musicians to keep personal relationships alive while also meeting the needs of the music business. Even though the event with the recordings was painful, it did not define their legacy. Instead, it added a layer of complexity to the story of their lives. If you like this video, please click the next button and share it with your friends.